This is Chris Chapman, and I'm bringing you the solution to the logic puzzle from the week of November 4th, 2024. Islands in the Stream, also known as Nurikabe, which I found out in Japanese means to paint walls. All right, so we have some instructions to follow. We're going to shade some squares black so that each number belongs to a group of white squares, which we're going to call an island. The squares we shade black are called the stream. Now, a number in a white square counts the number of white squares in its island. So, for example, a three belongs to an island of three white squares, including the three. All squares in an island must touch horizontally or vertically, but every island must contain a number and every number must belong to an island. Different islands cannot touch horizontally or vertically. Diagonally is okay. All black squares, the stream must be connected, and there could be no two by two blocks of squares, uh, black squares, which are called pools. The solution is unique and requires no guessing. I did give some hints that a one must be surrounded by black squares. If a square is adjacent to two numbers, it must be black. And remember that all black squares must be connected. Look for trapped black squares. But the truth is, you also look for trapped white squares as well. Now I'm going to do something a little bit different. Instead of using black, I'm going to use blue for the water so that you can still see the black grid lines. And we're going to do some filling in. Trying to see if I can get all this. There we go. All right. So where should we start? Well, as I mentioned, any square with a one belongs to an island of one white square and therefore must be completely surrounded by water on the north, south, east, and west. So we start by filling in all the squares around the ones with black, or in this case, blue to indicate the water. The next hint is that if there's a square that is adjacent to two numbers, it must be water. For example, take a look at this square right here. It is adjacent both to the two to the left of it and the two below it. If that were not water, then it would connect the two twos into an island that number one has too many squares and number two has too many numbers. So the adjacent square rule is pretty important. Any square adjacent to two different numbers must be water. So this square and this square both touch the two twos. This square touches two twos going down. This square touches the two and the three. This square touches the two and the three. This square touches the five and the four. This square touches the five and the four. And I believe we have found all squares that touch two or more numbers, and two numbers. All right. So once you've decided all these places have to be water, now you start looking for trapped things. For the sake of clarity, I'm going to go label or color all the numbers that have squares this light yellow color to indicate that it's land, it's part of an island. You don't actually have to color in the white squares, but it'll help us see something here in a moment. So let's color all of those, whatever color you want to call this. Now, we can look for either trapped water or trapped islands. By a trapped island, it's a number or a land square that is forced to go in a certain direction. For example, look at this two on the top. It's a part of a two square island, but the only direction it can go is to its left. So to the left of this two must be land, and that completes that number's island, so we have to surround it by water. Now, another trick is to look for squares that are completely surrounded by water, like the one we just made. If there's not a number in it, then it must be water, because if it were an island, it would be by itself and there would be a one there. So any square that doesn't have a number and is surrounded on all four sides by water must also be water. There's also now another trapped land piece. This two, as part of a two island, must go to the left, and therefore that completes it, and that fills in that square with water to surround that island. Now, there are other trapped land pieces. We'll just find them real quick. This two is trapped, so we'll escape and it will make its island, therefore surrounded by water. The square is surrounded by water and doesn't have a number, so it's an island. Excuse me, so it's water. The four is trapped, so it has to go over. But at this point, I don't know if this island continues upwards to the left or possibly both. There is no guessing required. So if you're ever at a juncture where you say, well, it could be this or that, then you need to look elsewhere. Do you see any more trapped land? I see one more trapped piece of land, and that is this two here. In order to continue its island, it must go down, but that completes the two island, which is now surrounded by water. At this point, I don't see any more trapped land, trapped islands, if you will, but I do see some trapped water. Remember the rules for the water. All the water has to connect, and there could be no 2 by 2 grids of water. So, for example, I couldn't have this. That's too much water, no pools. But do you see any parts of the stream that are trapped? I see two of them. On the top, we have this piece of the stream that is in this corner. Now, if the square to the right of it was land, then it would trap that water and it can join the rest of the stream. So this water has to escape to join the other water. So it has to go to the right and it has to go down. Now that does trap the 3 and the 2, but we'll get back to that in a minute. If you look at the bottom, this water is also trapped. So it must go to the right and at least up 1 to escape and join the rest of the water. At this point, I don't see any more trapped water, but I now see more trapped land. This 2 is trapped and must go downward. That island is complete. We'll surround it in a moment. This 3 is trapped and must go downward not once but twice, which also completes that. Let's go ahead and surround those with water. This part of the stream is now trapped. This empty square is surrounded by water, so it's water. And here's the first spot where we could possibly have a 2 by 2 pool of water. If this square right here were water, then we would have a 2 by 2 square, which is not allowed. So it can't be water, which means it's land. And speaking of land, we have some more trapped land at the bottom. This 8 got trapped, must go up at least twice, and this 3 got trapped, must go up at least once. Now this water is trapped, so it has to escape, which just forces the 8 to go up 2 more. At this point, nothing is trapped. So what can we do next? Well, if you see a square that is adjacent to 2 islands, which is an extension of the square adjacent to 2 numbers rule, if you see a square that is adjacent to 2 islands, it must be water. This square here cannot be land, because if it was, it would join the 4 and the 3, and an island can only have 1 number. So any square that is adjacent to 2 islands must be water, which subsequently traps the 3 and the 4. The 3 is now complete. We can surround it by water. This square is surrounded by water and not an island, so it's water. This water is now trapped and must go escape. Now the 8 island is not complete, but when we continue its escape path, we now have all 8 squares that it belongs to. That belongs to that island. This 4 is currently trapped. It must escape to the right, but it cannot go, I'm sorry, to the left, but it cannot go further to the left because then it would join with the 5. So that tells us that it must go up and that this has to be water, which is evident now because the 4 is completed when we surround it. Now the 5 is trapped and escapes to the left. The 5 and the 4 have an adjacent square, so it's water. That traps the 4, so it must move to the left. And at this point, all the tricks we have are no longer useful. If you're thinking the water must escape to the right, be careful because this stream goes all the way over here and has other ways to escape. So is there a rule that we can come up with that we haven't thought of yet? And the answer is yes, there's actually 2. One is if an island is close to another one and it gets too close, it might trap the island before it gets all of its squares. For example, look at this 3. If the square to the right of it was land, that creates 2 adjacent squares to the 5 island. That would force both of these to be water, which now cuts off the 5. This one takes a little bit more finesse to look out for, but anytime you have 2 islands that are almost diagonally adjacent, then that creates extra common adjacent squares, which could trap one of the islands. So this has to be water. Another trick is sometimes there are empty squares that are too far away to be parts of islands. For example, look at this square up here. If that were part of an island, what would it connect to? It's too far away to connect the five, and it's too far away to connect the three. So that can't be island, which means it must be water. Along the same lines of logic, this square must be water. Why? Because if it were an island, what's it going to connect to? It's too far from the three. It's too far from the five. So that can't be island. So it must be water, which creates two possible pools, one here and one here, neither of which can be water, both of which must be land. Both lands must escape. The three island is complete. The five island completes right afterwards. Surround the five. And now all we got to do is figure out where to put the four. Now, do you see how it has to finish? There's a couple of ways to reason it, but this point here, this cannot be land because it's too far away. Right now, that would create a five island, which is too big. So that can't be land, which means it must be water. That creates a potential pool. It can't be a pool, so that has to be land. Completes the four island, which completes the puzzle. These are really interesting puzzles because it doesn't look like there's much to go on, but as you practice them, you see that there are tons and tons of hints. I hope you enjoyed the puzzle, and if you do, feel free to go to the website where I got it from. It is a free website. You can subscribe to it monthly to get access to older puzzles. They're only $2 a month, or it's only $2 a month. I get no kickback from this. It's just a site that I love and I actually subscribe to.